The Last Footnote at Fenwick Hall. A Cambridge Reunion Mystery, 1937. Good evening, dear listeners. Tonight, I invite you into a world of coal fires and cut crystal, of ancient oaths and modern sins. The year is 1937, and at a grand country house in Cambridgeshire, old friends have gathered to celebrate their shared past. But before the weekend ends, one among them will be silenced forever, and only the sharpest mind can untangle why. If you enjoy mysteries that challenge your wits and transport you to another era, do hit that like button now. And subscribe, because I have many more tales waiting in the shadows for you. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Toast and the Silence. The October dusk came early to Fenwick Hall, spilling shadows across its Jacobean facade and setting the mullioned windows ablaze with the last light of day. Motorcars lined the gravel drive, an Alvis Speed 25, two stately Wolseleys, a rakish Riley, their chrome catching the glow of carriage lamps being lit by silent staff. Inside, the ancient house breathed with new life as alumni of St. Bartholomew's College, Cambridge, gathered for what promised to be a memorable weekend. The long gallery hummed with refined conversation. Gentlemen in evening dress and ladies in muted satins moved beneath portraits of long-dead Fenwicks, each holding a glass of Fino sherry or a delicate china cup. The air carried the mingled scents of beeswax polish, coal smoke from the library fire, and the faint sweetness of autumn roses arranged in silver bowls. At the heart of this civilized assembly stood Professor Lionel Harrington, a tall, silver-haired figure of 58 years, his bearing still erect despite the weight of scholarship that had bent so many of his colleagues. As chair of moral philosophy, Harrington commanded respect even from those who disagreed with him, and tonight, it seemed, several did. A toast, called Sir Roland Fenwick, their host, raising his glass. He was a man of 43 who wore his baronetcy with the ease of inherited habit, though those who knew him well might have noticed the tension around his eyes. To St. Bartholomew's College, may she continue to produce minds as sharp as our memories are fond. St. Bartholomew's, came the chorus, and crystal sang against crystal. But as the echo faded, a voice cut through the warmth with the precision of a scalpel. Tell me, Harrington, said Harold Pemberton, a stout industrialist whose Pemberton Chemicals had endowed 2 research fellowships, this address of yours tomorrow, will it cost me my investment, or merely my reputation? The room didn't quite fall silent, but conversations dimmed like lamps turned low. Professor Harrington's smile was courteous, even gentle. My dear Pemberton, conscience has no price. Surely you recall that from our student days. Or perhaps, and here his voice took on the particular kindness that precedes a cut, you were reading economics rather than ethics. A few nervous laughs rippled through the company. Miss Verity Lark, standing near the portrait of the 3rd Baronet, watched the exchange with the stillness of a cat at a mousehole. At 34, she possessed the kind of beauty that revealed itself slowly, intelligent grey eyes, a thoughtful mouth, and the carriage of someone who had learned to observe before acting. Her dove-grey evening gown was simple but perfectly cut, and at her throat she wore a small silver brooch in the shape of a chess knight. She had been observing the room for the past hour, as was her habit. A Cambridge alumna herself, she had assisted Admiralty ciphers during the war, and the skills of pattern recognition had never quite left her. Now she noted the small tells that others missed. Miss Margaret Whitlow, the young college archivist, had flinched when Sir Roland praised the Fenwick collection during his welcoming remarks. Just a tremor of the fingers around her glass stem, but unmistakable. The Reverend Julian Ashdown, college chaplain, had gripped his sherry glass so tightly at the mention of scholarship funds that his knuckles showed white. He had released it only when Dr. Beatrice Carmichael engaged him in conversation about the chapel's medieval brasses. And Dr. Carmichael herself, brilliant chemist, Girton Fellow, one of the few women in the room wearing academic honors with quiet pride, had gone very still when Harrington mentioned his forthcoming address on tainted philanthropy and university research. Her dark eyes had fixed on the professor for just a moment too long before she turned away to examine a portrait with elaborate casualness. If you'll excuse me, Harrington said now, setting down his glass with a decisive click, I must fetch a reference before my remarks this evening. I should hate to misquote Cicero among such distinguished company. He nodded to the room and made his way toward the library, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The conversations resumed, perhaps a touch more animated than before, as if to cover the awkwardness of Pemberton's challenge. Miss Lark noted the time on the bracket clock, 9 minutes. She accepted a second glass of sherry from a passing servant and drifted toward the terrace doors, where Dr. Carmichael stood looking out at the darkening gardens. Before she could speak, however, a commotion arose from the direction of the library. Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper, a woman of 60 whose composure was legendary, appeared in the doorway of the long gallery. Her face had gone the color of old parchment. "Sir Rowland," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "you are wanted in the library." "At once, sir." The quality of her tone stopped all conversation. Sir Rowland set down his glass and moved swiftly from the room. Several guests made to follow, but Mrs. Ellis raised a hand. "Perhaps the gentleman only," she said quietly. "And, Dr. Carmichael, if you please." Miss Lark set down her sherry and followed. No one stopped her. The library at Fenwick Hall was a room designed for contemplation. Oak-paneled walls rose 2 stories, with a gallery running around 3 sides and rolling ladders providing access to the higher shelves. A hammerbeam ceiling arched overhead, and mullioned windows looked out onto the terrace and lawns. The fire in the great stone hearth had burned down to embers, casting long shadows across the turkey carpet. Professor Lionel Harrington sat in a leather wing chair before the fire, his head tilted slightly back, his eyes closed. On the small table beside him sat an open volume, De Officiis by Cicero, and a silver tray bearing a crystal decanter of port and 2 glasses. One glass was empty save for a thin red trace at the bottom. The other had been filled but not drunk, and on its rim was the distinct mark of dark red lipstick. Dr. Carmichael went to him at once, her fingers seeking his wrist, then his throat. After a long moment, she looked up and shook her head. "He's gone," she said softly. "Quite recently, I should think. Perhaps 15 or 20 minutes. Sir Rowland's face had drained of color. "But that's impossible. We were all in the long gallery. We would have heard if he'd called out," Miss Lark finished quietly. "But it appears he had no chance to do so." She moved forward, her trained eye taking in the scene with methodical precision. The library clock on the mantel read 12 minutes past 9, though she could have sworn she'd heard it chime the quarter hour just as Mrs. Ellis arrived in the long gallery. The casement window stood slightly ajar, its latch undone. A cool draft stirred the pages of the open book. From Professor Harrington's jacket pocket, the corner of a telegram peeked out, its yellow paper torn. "No one is to touch anything," Sir Rowland said, recovering himself. "I shall telephone for the police at once. And," he hesitated, looking at the small assembly, "perhaps we should gather everyone in the drawing room. Quietly, mind you. No need to alarm the ladies." "I rather think," Miss Lark said, still studying the room with that peculiar intensity of hers, "that alarm is precisely what is needed. Someone in this house has just committed murder." The word fell like a stone into still water. Dr. Carmichael looked up sharply. "Murder, my dear Miss Lark, the man has had a heart seizure, nothing more." "Tragic, yes, but—" "The port," Miss Lark interrupted gently. 2 glasses. One drunk, one prepared but untouched. The window unlatched from within on a cold October night. And if you look carefully at the decanter stopper, you'll notice it sits rather oddly in its neck, as if it had been recently removed and replaced by unfamiliar hands. Sir Rowland stared at her. "You cannot possibly mean—" "I mean only what I observe, Sir Rowland. But I suggest we secure the house and send for both the police and a doctor who can examine the professor properly." She moved to the library door. "And I shall require 1 minute of silence before anyone else enters this room." They stared at her, this grey-eyed woman in her evening gown, suddenly transformed into something rather formidable. 1 minute, she repeated. To listen. And in the silence that followed, as Miss Verity Lark stood perfectly still in the center of that ancient library, the house itself seemed to hold its breath and wait for truth to speak. What secrets might a silent room reveal to one who knows how to listen? And why would a murderer prepare 2 glasses of port when only one victim was intended? Stay with me, dear listeners. The night at Fenwick Hall is just beginning, and before it ends, we shall uncover truths that some would have preferred stay buried forever. If you're intrigued, please do subscribe. I promise you, the mysteries only deepen from here.